Hey, it's Dave Bauer.
And this is Brian Mertens, and you're listening to Rewilding Conversations.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, hi, Brian. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm well today. A little cloudy here in Buffalo, New York, but otherwise a pleasant day.
Yeah, we've been getting some rain here in Nova Scotia, and last day or so, and got a little bit of sun peeking through now, but it's really, I think it's going to get nice. So
Good.
So yeah, I've been looking forward to this, just a chance to talk about the art of questioning and reconnect with you. And yeah, I think we're going to have a lot of fun diving into this topic. So I don't know, is there anything else that you want to say before we jump in here?
Well, just that we had the pleasure of touching on this rather recently to a pretty nice room full of nature facility managers, and we really enjoyed the dialogue and conversation. And in the work both you and I are doing, I just see this tool, this topic that we're going to be diving into today as being very pivotal and valuable, and something that not everyone in the world completely understands its power and value. And when you use some of these topics that we're going to talk about, these tools and strategies that we're going to talk about today, early in your work with children in particular, because the lens that I'll likely touch on quite frequently is through the lens of working with young children, early childhood kind of domain children, but not limited to that, probably ages 2 to 8 or 10. You really can have some really nice fun with children.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's just going to be fun because I've definitely I probably spent more of my energy like focusing early on in my journey, even just thinking about how do I use the art of questioning with myself and my own awareness to basically help me tune in with nature and start tuning in with different patterns that are happening around the landscape, and then more recently doing a lot of work with adults and just people actually working with the mentors and using the art of questioning with mentors and educators to help them open their awareness, because if you don't open your awareness, then you're not going to be able to help the kids open theirs. So I like to just kind of keep that. So I think we're going to get like a lot of different angles on this, which is really cool. And, I relate it back to the thing that you mentioned about it's something that a lot of people don't really recognize the power of the question. And it's like I like to think about Socrates and Plato and like the ancient philosophers, and how so much of what they did, like if you look at the patterns in Plato's philosophy, the way that they explored a subject, it was all about questioning. And I think there's a lot of the best education that happens in the world. Like when it really happens at a very deep level, it's because you're drawing the knowledge out of the student, and you're drawing a deeper awareness out of the student, rather than sort of the typical mainstream approach to education, which is, I'm the expert and I'm going to like bestow all my knowledge on you. Right. And so, it's really been my experience that like if you can really just start asking some questions and find something that gets the listener, get whoever you're sharing the questions with, gets them really genuinely curious and really genuinely interested in paying attention and looking closer at an idea or something on the landscape, like what's happening with a bird or a plant, it really starts to get their brain a lot more engaged in the process of learning. So it's possible to go really very deep using the questions. And so I guess what I was thinking, I was curious, like when you, Dave, when you think about the art of questioning, like what does that mean to you? Because we might have, like, I think we definitely have overlap in our definitions, but we might also have some differences. So I'm curious what it is for you that you think of when you hear the term art of questioning.
So among the things I think of is the breadth of skill development, the breadth of capacity within the human organism, okay? So what if one engaged in a tool, a strategy, a pedagogy, a way of being in the world that engaged creative thinking or problem solving? What if using skillful questioning approaches, stimulated curiosity, amplified observation skills, really invited rich sensory awareness, moving into the interdimensional aspect, socialization, fostered socialization among the people that are in a place together, and with that communication and the use of language. So I think the really broad answer to your question is a lot of that comes up, which is very exciting for me because it kind of touches on something that we'll talk about, I hope, in a little bit, called lantern consciousness. So we'll compare perhaps lantern consciousness and spotlight consciousness in terms of this topic, because both of them have rich qualities, and I think the adults in our world and perhaps the adult nature mentors are going to maybe spend a little more time and energy on a spotlight mode, whereas anyone that works with particularly young children, if they're skillful, will shift a little bit into a thoughtful lantern consciousness mode. So that's a long answer to a question, and I'm going to bring it back to you, and for you, Brian, what comes up. Let's get our language started with those that might enjoy listening to what we're saying today.
Yeah. Well, my kind of, I guess, first introduction to the idea of questions as a powerful way of getting the brain engaged in learning came in my late teens when I was getting interested in just learning about psychology and how my mind works, and there was a thing that I started to learn about questions where when you ask someone a question, there's actually a different response in the brain compared to, like, if you just give them the answer. And they've shown that when you look at a brain that someone has asked a question, in order for you to even consider the answer, whether or not you get the answer, there's brain activity that goes on for 3, 4, 5 minutes after the question.
Yeah.
Even if you're not consciously thinking about the question. So if I just throw it out there right now, like what's happening with the birds right now in nature? The fact that I just asked that question, everyone who heard that question, you're now processing that question at a possibly some sort of conscious level, but also possibly at a more subconscious level. There's things happening in your mind because of the direction that was set just by the fact of listening to that question. And so I got really curious and, like, how can I use this to basically optimize the way that I look at the world and to look at the world more effectively and be more successful in the things that I do. And then as I got more and more intentional and conscious about my desire to start connecting with nature, I came across this guy called John Young, who I might have mentioned before to you, Dave. I'm not exactly sure, but he was talking about his experience as a child being mentored by a guy called Tom Brown Jr. And basically what would happen is John would go out every day to sit in nature and just observe what was happening. And then when he came back from those experiences, Tom would give him a phone call every day and basically collect his story. He would harvest the story, be like, "Hey, John, what happened while you were outside today? What did you notice? What did you see? What did you observe? And what route did you take to get to your sit spot? And what birds were out there? What trees were out there? What was happening with the plants? Did you see any more of the fox sign that was out there?" And just taking him through like a whole host of different levels of awareness questions. Each different question sends your attention into a different direction. And doing this over a period of years, it completely had an effect on the way that John interacted with the landscape, and came to the point where basically he learned things about nature that he didn't realize other people didn't know, because he thought it was just normal for people to see patterns in the birds and how the birds are responding to hawks and foxes, and to just follow animal trails and that kind of stuff. And he developed a very, very deep connection with the natural world, and it was all through this questioning process, this going outside, having an experience in nature, then coming back and sharing the story and having a bunch of questions asked. And this is the journey that I've been going on for the last few years. I wanted to have that experience for myself. I wanted to feel that connection to nature, because I think that's another one of those things that I think people in the modern world don't realize the power that being connected to nature has for people. And
you're touching on some really, really fascinating current state, the current state of how we access information and are in the world. So some months ago, I dove into the topic of neuroplasticity, and something you touched on a few minutes ago kind of made me write down the word while we were talking. So neuroplasticity is all about the circuitry in the brain, the neurochemical impulses. And when you ask questions, the evidence shows the brain lights up in a remarkably broader way than it does if you have a linear conversation that leads to a linear pathway. So the neural circuits are fewer. So if you're inviting new and novel thinking, questioning it when one images the brain is immediate evidence that questioning is a way to go. Go in with novel questioning. Among those novel questions we've discovered, there's a real simple one that's rather been around for some time. Many of us refer to it as the 5 W's and the H. So one of those 5 W's is who. So in a nature setting, we might ask ourselves and the people we're with, so who might have created this place and who lives here? And who do we see today and what do we hear today? What animals are on the water, in the air, on the land? Who is enjoying spending time with us today? Are we alone? Or are there others nearby? And who just made that noise? So I just took one of the 5 W's, who, and I didn't allow the listeners time to reflect. I just splashed them out in a really fast, divergent way. And when one slows down a bit, and you used a term that many nature mentors use and good educators use in outdoor work, a sit spot. So when one finds a sit spot and then one simply either remembers the tools or has a little sheet that they take out in the woods with them, what a rich experience you can have in the period of 10 minutes when you drop into these 5 W's and the H. I might only just take a moment and touch on one of the other W's. Why? Because I think it's a really rich W. So why would a species be here today, here where I am? And why do these certain plants grow in front of me today? Why is that bird making that sound? Why are the birds so noisy or quiet? Or why are they flying? Or why are they not flying? Why are some of the trees growing so tall and others of the trees so short? So diving into the 5 W's and the H could be a really satisfying, rich experience. You could spend an afternoon with just one of the W's. So just wanted to introduce that tool and certainly would be very willing to share it with others. We do have quite a nice list of stems. We call them stems in our field. Stems are those kinds of things I read to you within the 5 W's and the H. So, the art, the joy and the skill of knowing do questions. Regrettably, the IT that we have in our life, and I want to compliment you for your conscious limitations of some IT in your life. When I discover you are able to be in the world without a cell phone, I immediately put you up on a bit of a mythic pedestal. There are so many people, so many, that are on the device. And when they're on the device, the neuroplasticity circuits are remarkably less because so much is being done by the device for you. When you put the device down, when you turn it off and you put it away, and you enter a natural setting, the neuroplasticity and the frequency and the diversity of circuits in a brain light right up again. So, we really want to limit consciously our time in a 24-hour cycle of being of using some of the devices that we've grown too frequently to hold and to limit our exploration, because I don't think we'll find too many of them that ask us the 5 W's and the H while we're holding them. The art of questioning, which is our topic today, I don't think there's too many of those devices yet that can remarkably lead us through a skillful episode of rich and satisfying questions based on what we're curious about. So, just a short segue on the state of our world today, not to bemoan it, but just to be wise about where it may be putting some limits on us. That's all. Yeah. Back to you, Brian. Back to you.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I love the one of the last things that you said there was around asking questions around curiosity, and I think that's actually a really important piece, because sometimes people can get a little tripped up when they're like, okay, so I'm a nature mentor. I want to go out. I know that I want to help my kids connect with nature, or my students connect with nature, or even I want to help myself connect with nature. And now I know that one of the best ways to do that is to expand awareness by asking questions, but then it creates this feeling of like, okay, how do I ask good questions? What questions do I need to ask right now? And it's kind of like, it's interesting, because when I first started thinking about strategies around how do I really get myself engaged with questioning, it was kind of like I was always looking for like the magic question. What's the magic question that I can ask that's always going to work? And the truth is that there's no magic question that's always going to work. Like a question that works really well for one person in one situation gonna flop for someone else in a different situation. And so I really like what you said about curiosity, because I think that really is the key. It's if you get a question that has that emotion of like genuine curiosity, where you genuinely want to know the answer. And my favorite type is like when it's a burning question. You know, it's like you're so curious and interested in something that when you ask that question, it just lights you up, and you're like, oh man, I really want to know the answer to this question. And that's when you know you've got a really good one. So yeah, I guess I wanted to. You reminded me of that, because that can be like a good thing as you're going through this, and thinking about asking some good questions, is to pay attention inside to how does a question, when you ask a question, how does that affect you on an emotional level? Does it really touch something where you're like, oh man, that question gets me good, or does it not work? And either way is fine. One little when I was starting out, I did something that I called a question journal, where I basically had a journal, and it was like just your standard coil binding journal, and like 150 or 200 pages or something. And the only thing that I put in this journal is it was a big list of questions. And so anytime I got a question, something that I was like, I have this question, I'd put it in the journal. And my goal was to completely fill this whole thing with different questions. So I'd go outside and I'd be like, what's happening right now? What's happening with the birds? Why is that bird making that noise? How long has he been making that noise for? Does he make that noise every day, or is it something that has only happened today? Is this something that I would see in the evening if I stayed here till the evening? And I just start asking all these questions and writing them down in this journal, and noticing which ones are having that effect on me, and kind of taking the approach of like just going for quantity instead of quality, and then noticing which ones were actually really, really good for me, and I'd sort of underline those ones. And so that could be like a little takeaway for anyone who's wanting to work on this, is to like keep a question journal. That can be a really fun thing to do.
And then let's revisit something that kind of came up earlier, because I think we tend to be in the world in a slightly different way, and we meaning adults versus young children. So if I could just point that out to anyone that might be in a relationship with a young child, a grandparent, a teacher, an educator who has dominion with and work with younger children. So I'll just hit this briefly. So what might be the bird? What might be the answer? So that falls, and there's no right or wrong here. They're just two different types of awareness and consciousness. So spotlight consciousness is what filters out kind of other stimuli and senses and goes deeply into what was that sound? What could that bird be? It dives in. It's like a spotlight. It's taking the parts of a whole and following a path and immersion into a specific aspect of nature. And that's a really rich way of discovering the world and asking questions in a spotlight mode. Comparing that in a different strategy, intentionally maybe a different strategy, would be lantern consciousness, a lantern mode of question awareness. So in a lantern mode, it's much more diffused and wide and sensory. So it uses all of the senses at the same time. So when a child walks into a place, it's really a remarkable moment to witness the child, to just watch, be next to the child for a few minutes, and see if you can just anticipate, where is this child? What is this child smelling, touching? And then kick in some cool questions. But just be really still for a little while and take on that mode of lantern consciousness, because you've got a rock star next to you. The rock star is the kid, the child. Many of us have forgotten how to be in an environment in a lantern mode, and yet many native people in other parts of the world who have only known nature their whole life, you find remarkable lantern consciousness in a high number of the adult population there, because it's this capacity to just be in the moment and appreciate the ambiance of that place. Ambiance meaning all my senses are open. What am I perceiving? Is this satisfying? Because what we find in the research we're doing is that there is a degree of satisfaction, quieting of appetite and urge when you get a little still and just sit and be in a natural setting. You don't have to necessarily be there to find something at all. And you come out of the woods, you come out of the little nature immersion, even if it's your local park or creek or whatever, or a walk around your block, and you come back with a stillness and a centeredness, because there's something organic about our need to want this. It quiets us down. So they talk about obesity is one of the things that nature play addresses. And it's partly about the physical activity, but what most people don't know, it's a lot more about satisfying many more of the senses, so that appetite, eating food, does not have to be so hyper-satisfied, because you've satisfied many more of the senses of a human organism. So end result, less obesity, So it's a remarkable way of being in the world. And as I hope we're doing with some skill, using skillful questioning to get you out there, to put you in that place, in that setting.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you do you find yourself mostly using art of questioning in kind of like an intentional way? Like, is that something that you use with your grandchildren, Dave? Is that sort of like the main area where you use it?
What's fascinating is I get quieter. And I allow the child, whether they're young, right now that my grandchildren are about 8 and 10, and I'm introducing them into how to shoot a bow. And the neat thing about that particular game in the backyard is it's remarkably rich in terms of all the lessons you can learn from it. So I spend a little bit of time teaching them safety, a little bit of time teaching them language, terms, but then a lot of the time, whether the child be a little bit older, like my 2 grandchildren that I'm referring to now, 8 and 10, or whether a child is much younger, I just get kind of still and quiet, and I give them a chance to do it, repeat it, try it. I don't know what does it feel like? What does it taste like? What does it look like? Those might be the things I'd say, but most of the time, especially initially, I'm pretty still and quiet and observing, and what that does, that lets the child know they have the power. They have the capacity to manage this time, this shared time. It is not Papa, me, grandfather, who's responsible for leading this. They are on the front edge of the experience. When a child senses that they're creating this experience and they're not relying on being entertained, a really cool shift occurs, and it lets me, the older person, I can relax more because I don't have to manage this event. I don't have to manage it. I can be with it. So I hope I addressed your question. I do use questions, but most often I start by just trying to get me quiet and observing all of what that child is doing, and then gently applying a question or two that's appropriate.
Yeah, totally, and that's just a really good point. I heard it earlier too that so much of this, even though we're talking about questioning, really you have to start with observation. And it's not just about barreling people over the head with a million questions.
Yeah.
It's really about waiting and watching and being aware of what's happening, finding the edge of that awareness, what people are paying attention to, and then just tossing one question and seeing what happens. And that when you get a question that really lands in a really good place, it can just totally shift the awareness into this whole deeper space, and then you can just watch for a little bit longer and just see what happens as the effects of that question settle out. And and then at some point you'll have this feeling of like, oh, I'm curious about this now, and you can just ask that. And so it's like this really slow and gentle back and forth ebbing and deepening of that conversation.
We all feel it when we step into the woods. We all feel it when we get in nature. Things seem to be slower there. Well, we live in a bit of a frenzied, artificial, technologically driven world. So when you get into nature, it may seem dull. Well, that's because there's a lot of really cool things going on, but your sensual input is so heightened. Things have to hit you on the side of the face to get your attention, whereas when you get just a much quieter, much more subtle stimuli begin to become relevant. But until you get a little quiet and observe, as you say, Brian, the level of stimuli, the intensity of it, is often much more softer, but remarkably divergent in natural settings, versus a horn honking or a phone ringing or a bell doing this. It's just we come away quieter. Some people would say we may come away a little more peaceful when we learn to be in nature and apply this questioning technology to our time in nature, whether we're alone or whether we're with others. So there's a softening of this experience that I find really satisfying. When my day is crazy busy, I know, thank God, I know a little signal goes off. Dave, get outside. Dave, hello, get outside. Take a bike ride. Doesn't have to be long or rigorous. Take a walk. Just open the door and stand on the back porch. Just get outside, and I'm just better. I'm just better.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Do you find when you do ask questions, are you mostly asking questions when you're outside doing an activity like working on a bow or spending time in a park or something? There's like a difference between asking questions when you're outside in the moment of nature with people. Do you ever find yourself say your grandkids had some sort of experience, they went out and you weren't able to go with them, but that they were off doing something cool. Do you ever use questions when they come back, like as a storytelling technique to help them get their story out and just draw them deeper into their story?
I think that's a really fascinating approach, Brian. I need to admit that I need to practice that a little bit more frequently. So I like the introduction to using it because storytelling is a very rich and satisfying part of what we're all about here. And questioning can lead to remarkably rich storytelling. So let's imagine, when you said activity, I do think it helps the human mind. It helps if you're doing an activity. So whether I'm out crayfishing with the kids or whether I'm shooting a bow with them and helping them to learn to shoot a bow reasonably accurately and safely in my backyard, or they've been out doing something and I might check in with them when they come back. This use of questions helps. I do find that young children, and this may be my own limitation, they like that they've done it. They're not so drawn to retelling the story unless I need to get wiser, and those listening in might be able to give us some advice here. When a child experiences something away from you, like you had said, and then they come back, what are some tricks and tools one might use to help them amplify and gain some rich aspect of that experience that you were not in on? Because
right.
I don't have a lot of practice with that. You may have some experience with that, Brian, but I don't know that I really do. Yeah.
I can definitely think of times when working with kids. There was a program that I was helping out with when I lived out on the West Coast, and one of the groups that I spent some time with, it was actually one of my favorite groups, because we were working with kids that were like 4, 5, and 6 years old, and it was the youngest group that I had ever spent time with, and we would see them like once a month over the course of the year. And so one of the things, like, as we're kind of at the start of the day, we're waiting for folks to arrive, and they're kind of trickling in over, 30 minutes till start of the day. So we're just sort of, there's games happening, and we have, like a nature museum with tracks and skulls and field guides and things that some of the kids, they want like a quiet experience, and so they're going and they're getting curious about the tracks, and then some of the other kids that have more energy, they're off playing a game. And I always love, that's like the time when you can like point to a track, like a plaster cast of a raccoon track on the table, and one of the things that I found is if I actually started the storytelling experience by just saying, hey, the other night I was outside and I was walking through the forest and I saw a raccoon. Isn't that cool? And I found that a lot of times they would respond by starting to tell stories of times when they saw a raccoon. And they would be like, oh, we had a raccoon in our backyard 2 months ago, and they'd talk about how it was getting into the garbages, and they watched it, and there were babies there, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just sort of an opportunity. Then you can say, do you remember what time of day that was? Like, was that in the morning or in the evening? And just sort of those like questions that are really simple to answer, not necessarily open-ended, but like giving them an and/or option, like was it on the ground or was it up in a tree? And that's a question that's pretty easy for kids to answer, and it helps you. The way that I think about it is like when someone tells a story, when a kid tells a story, or even when an adult tells a story, you can actually see what's happening inside their mind through their language. So, if they say, I saw a raccoon, all you really know is that there's a picture of a raccoon in their mind. Yeah. But then you can start to ask a question like, was this in the morning or the evening or the afternoon? They say, oh, it was in the evening. So now we've got a raccoon in the evening. Was it on the ground or was it up in a tree? Oh, it was up in a tree. And so it starts to build in the picture. And you can expand out. Hey, do you know what kinds of trees you have in your backyard? Like, did that tree have leaves that fall off in the winter, or does it have like needles on it? And they say, oh, I think that one has needles on it. And so now you're starting to get a picture that it's a raccoon in the evening up in a tree, in a coniferous tree. And so it's just starting to build that picture. And every time that you ask that question, they have to look deeper into their mind's eye and they have to build a more of a clear image of what actually happened. And all of that, just, I think of it as like really laying the foundation for their next experience, that the next time they go out and they encounter an animal like a raccoon or even now other animals, they're going to be paying so much more attention for those categories of information that we pulled out through our questioning. And just the fact that we took them really deep into that mind's eye image through their story, they're going to have so much more capacity for thinking about nature and holding nature inside their mind.
Yeah. So what's fascinating is what we're talking about in this conversation is good questions trigger novel neural pathways and take you to places you weren't expecting to go. I wasn't expecting to go to this topic of storytelling in this conversation, and yet I'm fully excited and ready for another topic very soon, Brian, on storytelling, because I think the questioning technology and tools for today's conversation, there's this whole rich world of storytelling that cultures have used across many, many, many generations. So if nothing else, I'm really excited about this topic that we're touching on and how we can bring a exciting conversation of storytelling to the folks that might follow us and join us. There's a lot of opportunity here. And as you pointed out well, asking some of the, let's just call it correct questions or intriguing questions. That's a better word. Asking some interesting and intriguing questions can really take the story, the experience, to a really rich level that it may not have naturally fallen into. But in the hands of a skillful mentor, skillful questioning supplier, it can really enrich it. And I think the best teachers on the planet, through all generations, have mastered this technique of the use of questions. So, this is just a very, very exciting, satisfying conversation today.
Yeah, I totally agree. I am really enjoying, this is one of my favorite topics, and I think we should definitely do an episode on storytelling. And I think it would be cool, like, for anyone who's listening, if there's other topics that you're hearing that we should go deeper into, definitely let us know. And I think there's just a lot of cool stuff that came out here.
Yeah, so perhaps they can find a way to communicate with us and send us their ideas, send us their suggestions, send us the tip of their iceberg being their resource bank. Intrigue Brian and I in terms of what intrigues you. And I think the thread that we can carry through this is just that capacity of being curious. We've hit on it a few times. I've always said to the people that I work with, if you're curious, if you're natively curious, I want to be with you. I want to work alongside you. If the curiosity is just not quite there, then this may not be the best time for us to connect, because I thrive in environments when I'm either curious myself or when I'm curious with one or more people as well.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'd love to, I still have this intention, this goal to put together some sort of resource template around questioning, just sort of like a reference guide for the 5 W's and the H, and just some different layers that people can reference and have that into a nice little PDF file. I don't know exactly when that will be ready, but we'll try to make that available. Yeah, yes. It is coming. Yeah. And part of why I wanted to do this episode was to just sort of create the background, like introduce the concept, and just so that we have some context for why questions are so helpful, and then we'll have this PDF resource that you can use actually in the field and to help you get some good practice with this. So definitely look for that, and that'll be cool.
So just a way that any listener could reach to me, and then when it reaches me, it reaches Brian, and then Brian will probably supply this information as well, would be to take a peek real quickly, because there's a contact page on www.creativenatureplay.com. That's one of the websites that I use for a lot of the work that I'm talking about with Brian, and it would be really exciting to hear some of the listeners post a little bit of information there so that we can use that relationship building tool there. Brian, is there some place that you'd like to direct people to reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm at nature-mentor.com, and if you go to my About page, you can contact me on that page. I have a contact page too, so basically anywhere you see a form, you can say hi and just let me know that you listen to this podcast. And yeah, I'd definitely love to hear from you. And yeah.
Well, Brian, this has been great, and I continue to get, here we've been in relationship for only a couple of months, and the energy and the synergy and the level of satisfaction is very, very rich. I'm very happy.